I need to establish certain facts before this testimony degrades further. The wound in my abdomen suggests I have perhaps an hour, perhaps less. The enforcers are conducting mop-up operations, 3 levels above. I can hear the occasional burst of automatic fire, the specific crack of stub guns against ferrocrete. They will not find me here. I chose this alcove deliberately. I will complete the record while cognition permits. My name was Davrim Holst. Subsector designation Hive Tertius. Underhive level -73. Block Kappa 5. I was 31 years of age at the time events commenced. I had been employed in the reclamation yards for 7 years, processing scrap metal for 14 hours per shift, 6 days per rotation. My wife Mana had died 2 years prior, pulmonary collapse, the Medicae said, though no Medicae actually examined her. We could not afford confirmation. She stopped breathing during sleep cycle. I logged the death with block administration. They removed the body within 18 hours. Efficient. 3 children remained. Karis, age 9. Pell, age 7. Gem, age 4. All male, all requiring approximately 2,000 calories per day to maintain baseline health. The administratum ration allocation provided 1,200 calories per person per day. The gap between requirement and provision measured 800 calories per child. 2,400 total. The human body can sustain deficit spending for a time. Children's bodies somewhat longer than adults, as they cannibalize growth potential before critical systems. I observed this process in my sons across a period of 4 months. Karis developed the signs first, the specific hollowing beneath the eyes, the way his skin began to seem translucent over his knuckles. He stopped complaining of hunger after the first month. That was not improvement. That was the body learning to stop requesting what would not be provided. Pell followed the same trajectory 3 weeks later. Gem, being youngest, had the furthest to fall. He continued to cry for food well into the 3rd month. Then he stopped. He would simply look at me during rationing time with an expression I cannot adequately describe in this state. Expectation without hope. The file remains uncorrupted. I can still see it. I applied for supplemental rations. The request required submission to Block Administration, Sub-Department of Nutritional Allocation, Form 27-B. I filled the forms correctly. I submitted on the 1st of the month. I followed up at the prescribed 2-week interval. The clerk informed me that processing time for supplemental requests averaged 4 to 6 months. She did not look at me when she said this. She was reading from a prepared script. I asked what I should do in the interim. She said the administratum advised maintaining faith in the Emperor's provision. I logged her response. I returned to our HAB unit. The space measured 4 meters by 5 meters. Single room. Sleeping pallets occupied the western wall. Cooking unit, non-functional, occupied the eastern wall. We had not cooked in 8 months. Rations arrived pre-processed. A window, if you could call it that, looked out onto the adjacent block's ventilation shaft. The air smelled of recycled lubricant and something organic I never identified. Temperature held steady at approximately 19 degrees Celsius. Cold enough to sleep poorly. Not cold enough to die. Karis weighed 32 kilograms. I knew this because I had weighed him 4 months prior at a public medical station. Baseline weight for a 9-year-old male of his height should approximate 38 kilograms. He had lost 6 kilograms. I could see his ribs when he removed his shirt. The knobs of his spine protruded like a topographical map. When I placed my hand on his chest, I could feel his heartbeat against my palm with no intervening tissue to cushion it. His heart was eating his body to continue functioning. I made the calculation multiple times, checking my figures. At current rate of decline, Karis would reach critical system failure within 6 to 8 weeks. Pell would follow within 10 weeks. Gem had more reserves but would not survive his brothers by more than a month. The math was clean, simple, undeniable. The administratum would process my supplemental ration request in 4 to 6 months. My children would be dead in 3. I explored alternative nutrition sources. The official market sold protein supplements at prices that would require 4 months of my wages for 1 month's supply. The underhive black market sold synthetic compounds of questionable composition. I purchased a sample, cost me 3 days' wages, and tested it myself before considering it for the boys. The compound produced violent gastrointestinal distress for 6 hours. I logged it as unviable. I returned to the problem. The reclamation yards where I worked processed 17 tons of material per shift. Metals primarily, but also plastics, rubbers, organic waste. The organic waste went to the protein reclamation vats. Those vats were guarded. Theft of protein slurry resulted in immediate termination and criminal filing. I observed 2 workers attempt it during my tenure. Both were beaten by overseers, then handed to Arbeits. I never saw them again. The risk-to-reward calculation was unfavorable. I considered requesting overtime. The yards offered occasional extended shifts at 1.2 times standard wage. I submitted myself for the roster. I was informed that 1,700 workers had submitted for 200 available positions. Selection would be by lottery. I was not selected. I resubmitted the following month. Not selected. The mathematics were clear on that avenue as well. It was during this period that I first encountered the congregation. I should be precise about this. I did not stumble upon them. They found me. This is how these things work in the underhive. When you are desperate, when the shape of your desperation becomes visible to others, certain individuals take note. They catalog need the way overseers catalog labor. They wait until need reaches critical threshold. Then they approach. The man's name was Cullis. He worked in block Kappa 7, 2 levels down. I had seen him perhaps 3 times prior to our first conversation. He was perhaps 40 years of age, thin but not starved, with augmatic replacements on 3 fingers of his left hand. He approached me at shift end, at the reclamation yard gates. He said, "You have children." Not a question. Statement of observed fact. I confirmed. He said, "They're hungry." He said, "There are people who help families like yours. People who understand that the administratum does not always provide. People who gather together for mutual support." He said, "Food, medicine when needed. Community. We take care of each other when the Imperium fails to take care of us." I asked what was required in exchange. He said, "Participation. Attendance at gatherings. Contribution of time and faith. We are a congregation, not a charity. We help those who help the community." I asked what faith. He looked at me for a sustained moment. 3 seconds. 4. Then he said, "Faith that the powers governing this universe are more complex than the administratum acknowledges. Faith that there are forces willing to provide when prayer to the Golden Throne goes unanswered." I understood what he was describing. I had lived in the underhive for 31 years. You hear things, rumors of cults, whispers of organizations that operate beneath Arbeits' notice, that offer solutions the Imperium does not provide. You hear what happens to people involved with such organizations. You hear about the purges when the ecclesiarchy discovers them. You hear about the executions. I also understood that my sons would be dead in 3 months. I asked when the next gathering occurred. He provided coordinates. Sub-level 81, Section Theta, Warehouse 47. He said to come alone the first time. He said to come during night cycle, 14th hour. He said, "Bring nothing, expect nothing, simply attend. Observe, decide if our congregation suits your family's needs." The warehouse had been abandoned by whatever commercial interest originally occupied it. The structural designation remained on the entrance, Warehouse 47, but the interior had been repurposed. The main floor, perhaps 40 meters by 60 meters, had been cleared of machinery. Where cargo should have been stacked, there were benches. Improvised, but sturdy. Perhaps 200 people occupied those benches when I arrived. 200. I logged the number specifically because it indicated scale of operation. This was not a small gathering of desperate individuals. This was organized. Sustained. The benches themselves indicated permanence. Someone had built them, transported materials, assembled them. This congregation had existed long enough to develop infrastructure. I recognized perhaps a dozen faces, other workers from the reclamation yards, residents from surrounding blocks, a woman who operated a water redistribution station on level -70, a man I had seen begging near the transit station, people who existed at the margins, people whose faces carried the same hollow expression I saw in my mirror. Cullis found me near the entrance. He indicated I should sit toward the rear. He said the service would begin shortly. He said I should observe with an open mind. Then he moved toward the front of the warehouse, where a raised platform had been constructed. Not a proper altar, something improvised from crates and metal plating, but functional. A man ascended the platform. He was perhaps 50 years of age, his head shaved, ritual scars visible on his forearms. His voice carried across the warehouse without augmentation. He said, "The Imperium asks for your faith. It asks for your labor. It asks for your children when it requires soldiers, your food when it requires tithes, your lives when it requires bodies. It asks and asks and asks. And what does it provide in return?" The congregation responded in unison, suffering. He said, "You pray to the Emperor. You light incense when you can afford it. You make the sign of the Aquila. You teach your children the catechisms. You do everything the Ministorum demands. And still your children starve. Still your bodies break. Still your prayers go unanswered. Why?" The congregation responded, "Because the Emperor does not hear us." I felt something cold move through my chest. These were not thoughts you spoke aloud. These were thoughts that resulted in execution if reported. He said, "The Emperor sits on his golden throne, 10,000 years dead, maintained by machinery and the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers daily. He does not hear you because he cannot hear you. He is a corpse, a symbol, a tool the administratum uses to extract obedience from populations too numerous to govern by force alone. They have lied to you. They have always lied to you, but there are powers that do hear you, powers that offer genuine reciprocity, give and receive, serve and be served. This is the ancient contract. This is what we practice here." He raised his arms. The scars on his forearms were not random. They were symbols. I did not recognize the specific iconography, but I recognized the category. Ritual marking. Deliberate. Meaningful within a theological framework, he said. "We call upon the powers that dwell beyond the veil, powers that the Imperium fears, that the ecclesiarchy names daemon and heresy. But these powers answer when we call. They provide when we are in need. They ask for faith? Yes. They ask for service? Yes. But they give in return. They honor the contract." What followed was approximately 40 minutes of liturgy. I will not reproduce it in detail. The degradation of my cognition makes precise recall difficult, and some segments I deliberately did not retain. I can log the structure, call and response patterns, repetition of phrases in a language I did not recognize, rhythmic chanting that produced a specific resonance in the warehouse's acoustics. The congregation participated with evident familiarity. They knew the words. They knew when to speak, when to kneel, when to stand. At the conclusion of the service, the scarred man, I later learned his title was conductor, though whether that was rank or function remained unclear, descended from the platform. Members of the congregation approached him individually. He spoke briefly with each. Some received small packages, others received only words. When approximately half the congregation had been processed, Cullis indicated I should approach. I approached. The conductor looked at me with an expression I initially read as evaluation. He said, "Cullis tells me you have 3 sons." I confirmed. He said, "And they are hungry." I confirmed. He said, "The administratum will not help you." I confirmed. He said, "We will help you. But first, you must understand the terms. We do not offer charity. Charity is what the Imperium offers, empty words and prayers to a corpse god. We offer transaction. You provide service to the congregation. The congregation provides for your family. Equitable. Honest. Do you understand? I said I understood. He said, service begins with attendance. You will come to gatherings. You will participate in liturgy. You will learn the words, the patterns, the practices. This is minimal requirement. Do you accept? I calculated rapidly. Attendance at gatherings meant time away from my sons, but time away that resulted in food they could eat. The equation balanced favorably. I accepted. He handed me a package. Wrapped in cloth, perhaps 2 kilograms in weight, he said, protein. Actual protein, not synthetic. Enough for a week if you ration carefully. Return next gathering. Your service will deepen as your family's need continues. The powers we serve reward the faithful. I took the package. I departed the warehouse. I returned to my hab unit. I opened the package while my sons slept. The contents were as described. Protein bars, dried meat, nutrient paste of quality significantly above administratum rations. I calculated caloric value at approximately 12,000 calories total. Distributed across 3 children over 7 days, this provided enough to bring them above maintenance threshold. Not growth, not healing, but stabilization. I woke Karis. I gave him a portion. I watched him eat. I watched the way his hands trembled as he held the food, the way his jaw worked, the way his eyes widened when he tasted something other than processed paste. He said, "Where did you get this?" I said, "I found additional work." He said, "Can you find more?" I said, "Yes." That was the first lie I told him. Not about the food, I would indeed obtain more, but about the nature of the work. I was aware I was lying. I was aware that awareness constituted a moral boundary I was crossing. I logged it. I continued. Pell and Gem received their portions. The package lasted 8 days, not 7. I rationed more carefully than the conductor had suggested. During that period, I observed measurable improvement in all 3 children. Karis regained energy sufficient to move around the hab unit without visible fatigue. Pell's eyes lost some of their hollow quality. Gem stopped crying during sleep cycle. I attended the next gathering, and the next, and the next. The pattern established itself across a period of 6 weeks. I attended gatherings twice per week. I learned the liturgy. The words became familiar through repetition, though I did not then understand their meaning. The language was not Gothic, not any dialect I recognized, but the phonemes were consistent. The grammar patterns became predictable. I learned when to kneel, when to chant, when to remain silent. I learned the gestures, specific hand positions, directional orientations, the rhythm of breath control during certain phrases. Each gathering concluded with distribution. The conductor, or sometimes other senior members of the congregation, would provide packages to attendees. The packages varied in contents but maintained consistent caloric value. Protein primarily, but also preserved vegetables. Carbohydrate sources, occasionally even synthetic vitamin supplements. I received 1 package per gathering, 2 packages per week, sufficient to keep my sons above critical threshold. Karis's weight stabilized at 31 kilograms. Not growth, but cessation of decline. Pell similarly plateaued. Gem, being youngest, actually gained weight, perhaps half a kilogram across the 6-week period. I tracked these metrics carefully. I maintained a log, written on scrap paper I brought from the reclamation yards. The log confirmed what I observed. The congregation's provision was keeping my children alive. I understood that I was paying for this provision. Not with currency, I had none, but with participation, with presence, with the gradual normalization of practices I recognized as heretical. I told myself I was simply attending, simply saying words I did not believe, simply performing gestures that held no meaning for me. That was the second category of lie. Lies, I told myself. The congregation operated on a tiered structure. I came to understand this through observation and occasional questions to Cullis. The majority of attendees, perhaps 160 of the 200, were what he called supplicants. They attended gatherings, participated in liturgy, received basic provision. They were the foundation, the mass, the resource pool from which the congregation drew. Above supplicants were acolytes, perhaps 30 individuals. They attended additional gatherings beyond the standard services. They performed preparation work, arranging the warehouse, acquiring supplies, maintaining security at entrances. They received larger packages, better quality nutrition, occasionally other benefits, medical supplies, clothing, materials for HAB unit repair. Above acolytes were the devoted. Perhaps 8 to 10 individuals, the exact number fluctuated. They led liturgical responses, assisted the conductor during services, and, I suspected but could not confirm, performed functions I did not observe. They received the full weight of the congregation's support. Their families, if they had families, did not go hungry. The conductor stood above all. Singular authority, theological and administrative. He spoke with confidence that suggested direct communication with the powers the congregation served. Whether that confidence derived from genuine experience or theatrical training, I could not determine. But the congregation believed. That belief was measurable in their response patterns, their attendance consistency, their willingness to serve. After 3 months of regular attendance, Cullis approached me after a gathering. He said the conductor had noted my consistency. He said the congregation valued reliable members. He said, "You have the opportunity to deepen your service, to become an acolyte. The provision would increase. Your sons would not simply stabilize, they would grow." I asked what additional service would require. He said, attendance at preparation gatherings, assistance with practical matters, nothing theological initially. Simply help us maintain the congregation's function, and attendance at one additional service. The inner circle performed certain rites that supplicants do not witness. You would join those. I asked, what rites? He said, you will see when you attend. The powers we serve require more than words. They require demonstration of commitment, symbolic acts that prove faith is genuine. I understood subtext. I understood that symbolic acts was terminology that concealed something I would not want to perform. But I also understood that Keras had gained 1 kilogram in the past month, that Pell no longer looked skeletal, that Gem had begun to play occasionally to expend energy on activity beyond survival maintenance. I accepted. The first preparation gathering occurred 3 days later. I attended as instructed. Different location, smaller warehouse, only acolytes and devoted present. Perhaps 40 individuals total. The work was as Cullis had described, practical, not theological. We moved benches. We repaired structural damage to the warehouse. We sorted supplies that had been acquired through methods I did not examine too carefully. We inventoried nutrition packages. I performed these tasks efficiently. I had spent 7 years in reclamation work. I understood material handling, weight distribution, inventory management. The work was actually easier than my shift labor. No overseers, no quotas, simply tasks completed at sustainable pace with adequate rest intervals. The devoted who supervised the preparation work noted my efficiency. One of them, a man named Carrick, said, "You work like you understand systems." I said, "We need people who understand systems. The congregation grows. More families need help. More provision must be acquired and distributed. Organization matters. Would you be willing to assist with logistics coordination?" I asked what that would entail. He said, tracking supply levels, calculating distribution requirements, ensuring packages reach families according to need. Administrative work, clean work. He paused, then added, well-compensated work. I asked about compensation. He said, your sons would eat like overseers' children. That was specific language, deliberately chosen. Overseers' children did not go hungry. Overseers' children received administrative rations plus supplemental allowances, plus access to better quality markets. Overseers' children grew at appropriate developmental rates. I accepted. That decision marked the first point where I transitioned from passive recipient to active participant. I became useful to the congregation beyond my presence at liturgy. I became functionally valuable. And functional value, I was learning, carried different weight than simple faith. The logistics work began the following week. I was provided with records, written on actual paper, not data slate, harder to trace, listing congregation membership, family sizes, attendance frequency, and provision allocation. The records were surprisingly detailed. Someone had maintained this system with care. That someone, I learned, had recently been taken by the Arbites during an unrelated sweep. The congregation needed replacement. I analyzed the records across a period of 2 days. I identified inefficiencies in distribution patterns. Certain families received provision disproportionate to their attendance. Others attended regularly but received minimal support. The algorithm, if it could be called that, appeared based on personal relationships rather than objective metrics. I designed a new system. Attendance frequency weighted at 40%. Length of membership at 20%. Demonstration of commitment measured through participation in additional gatherings at 10%. The algorithm was clean, defensible, equitable within the congregation's framework. I presented the system to Carrick. He reviewed it. He showed it to the conductor. The conductor approved implementation. Within 1 month, congregation efficiency increased measurably. Provision reached families in need more consistently. Waste decreased. Packages no longer went to individuals who attended irregularly. Attendance rates improved because members understood the correlation between participation and provision. The system functioned. The conductor commended my work during a gathering. He said, "Brother Davrim has demonstrated that faith and intelligence need not be separate. The powers we serve value both devotion and competence. He serves as example." That was the first time I was named before the congregation. That was the first time I was identified not as supplicant, but as something integrated into the organization's structure. People began to recognize me, to approach me with questions about provision allocation, to treat me as authority. Keras, during this period, gained 4 kilograms. His growth resumed at nearly normal rates. Pell similarly improved. Jem, who had never known adequate nutrition before, became almost unrecognizable, filling out, developing normally, exhibiting energy levels appropriate for a child of 5 years. They did not know why the food had improved. They believed I had obtained better work. That lie had become load-bearing. I maintained it carefully. But lies require maintenance energy, and I was about to pay significantly more. The inner circle gathering occurred 6 weeks after I became an acolyte. Cullis informed me of the date and location. He said, "Attendance is not optional for acolytes. The rite is central to our covenant with the powers we serve. You will understand when you participate." The location was another warehouse, but this one had been modified more extensively. The floor had been painted. Not random painting, deliberate symbols, geometric patterns radiating from a central point. I recognized some of the shapes from the conductor's scars. Others were unfamiliar. The paint appeared to be mixed with something organic. It smelled of copper and rust. Approximately 40 people attended, all acolytes and devoted. The conductor stood at the center of the painted floor. He was unclothed from the waist up. His entire torso was covered in scarification. The patterns were intricate, deliberate, beautiful in a sense I did not want to acknowledge. He said, "What we perform tonight is sacred. Sacred not to the corpse god, not to the Imperium's lies, but to the powers that truly govern reality. These powers give when given to, they answer when called. But they require proof that we understand the nature of the universe, that we understand suffering is the currency of power, that we are willing to pay the price." They brought out a man. He was bound, gagged, perhaps 30 years of age. I did not recognize him. He struggled against the bindings, but the individuals holding him, 4 devoted, including Carrick, controlled him easily. The conductor said, "This man is not one of us. He was found informing Arbites about our gatherings. He chose loyalty to the Imperium over loyalty to community. He chose to starve his neighbor's children rather than allow us to feed them. His choice has consequences. I will not detail it. I can log that the man died. I can log that his death was not quick. I can log that the congregation participated, not all, but many. The conductor led. Others followed. Blood was collected in vessels. The vessels were distributed. Members drank. When the vessel reached me, colors said, "This is the price. This is what the powers require. Proof that we understand, that we have crossed the boundary the Imperium sets and found truth on the other side. Drink, and the covenant is sealed. Refuse, and you cannot remain acolyte. Your sons will return to administratum rations." I held the vessel. The liquid inside was still warm. I could smell the copper tang. I understood precisely what I was being asked to do. I understood the boundary I was being asked to cross. I understood that once crossed, certain returns become impossible. I thought of Keras. 4 kilograms gained, growing again, learning to smile. I drank. The taste was precisely as expected. Salt, iron, warmth. My body tried to reject it. I forced it down. I returned the vessel to Colors. He said, "Welcome, brother. You are acolyte in truth now." That was the moment. That was the specific point where passive participation became active complicity. I had attended gatherings that could be explained as desperation. I had performed logistics work that could be framed as mere organization. But I had consumed the blood of a murdered man as part of a ritual to powers the Imperium named Daemon. That had only one interpretation. I had damned myself, consciously, with full awareness, for approximately 4 kilograms of weight gain on my eldest son. The calculation, when I analyze it now with the clarity that approaching death provides, was sound. 4 kilograms represented the difference between normal development and permanent stunting, represented the difference between a child who could grow into functional adulthood and a child whose body would fail before 20. 4 kilograms of flesh, purchased with however many kilograms that man had contained. The mathematics balanced, the morality did not. I continued attending gatherings. I continued managing logistics. The congregation grew. My system for provision allocation was applied across a wider membership base. By the 6th month of my involvement, congregation attendance had increased to approximately 300 individuals. By the 9th month, 400. The growth was exponential. Word spread in the underhive. There was an organization that fed the hungry, that asked only for faith and service. The Arbeits noticed. Of course they noticed. You cannot operate an organization of 400 people without creating signatures that law enforcement detects. We began implementing security protocols, rotating warehouse locations, using coded language in public spaces, posting watchers at gathering sites. The congregation acquired weapons, stub guns primarily, a few auto guns, improvised explosives. The devoted who had military experience trained others in basic combat procedures. I was not part of the security apparatus. My value lay in logistics, but I was aware of the militarization. I was aware that the congregation was preparing for confrontation with imperial authority. I processed this information and continued my work because my sons were eating, and I had long since crossed the line where that rationalization failed. The inner circle gatherings continued monthly. The rituals varied but maintained common elements: a victim, blood, consumption. The victims were always described as threats, informants, rival cult members, individuals who had harmed congregation families. Whether those justifications were accurate or convenient, I did not investigate. I attended. I participated. I drank when the vessel reached me. I felt nothing during these rituals. That is important to log. Initially, I experienced revulsion, nausea, horror. By the 4th ritual, those responses had degraded. By the 7th, they had ceased entirely. I performed the actions required because they were required. My body complied. My mind observed. The gap between observer and participant widened until I could not locate the connection between them. Keras turned 11 years old. His weight had reached 42 kilograms, developmentally appropriate, healthy. He had begun helping at the reclamation yards during partial shifts. Child labor was common in the underhive. No one questioned it. He brought home small wages, not enough to matter, but enough to demonstrate he would survive to adulthood, that he would become a functional worker, that I had successfully kept him alive through the bottleneck of childhood starvation. He did not know what I had done to achieve that outcome. He knew only that food arrived regularly now, that our hab unit had improved slightly. Better pallets, a functioning heating unit, occasional luxuries like actual seasoning for our meals. He believed I had advanced at the reclamation yards. That lie had calcified into accepted reality. Pell was 9. Jem was 7. Both healthy. Both growing. Both alive because I had participated in the ritual murder of at least 12 individuals, probably more. I had lost count after the 15th Inner Circle gathering. It was during Keris's 11th year that the demands escalated. The conductor summoned me to a private meeting. Not a gathering. Just him, Kerik, 2 other devoted I recognized, and myself. He said, "The congregation has grown beyond initial projections. We now feed over 500 individuals. We have established satellite cells in 3 adjacent sectors. We are becoming significant." But significance attracts attention. The Arbites are actively hunting us. We need resources beyond what our current acquisition methods provide. I asked what he was proposing. He said, "There is an Administratum food distribution depot in Sector Kappa 9. It services multiple levels, redistributes rations to outlying blocks. Security is minimal. The Administratum relies on bureaucratic obscurity rather than physical protection. If we acquired even a portion of their inventory, we could feed the congregation for months, expand our reach, bring thousands into the Covenant." I understood what he was describing: raid, theft of Imperial resources, an act that would bring immediate and overwhelming response from authorities. I said this. He said, "We have no choice. The current supply lines are insufficient. We acquire food through black markets, through scavenging, through occasional theft from commercial sources. But those sources cannot scale. The depot can. One successful operation, and we secure the congregation's future." Kerik said, "We need your logistical analysis. Calculate requirements. Optimal timing. Distribution after acquisition. You understand these systems better than anyone." They were asking me to plan the operation, not to participate in the raid itself. I had no combat training, but to design it, to apply the same analytical framework I had used for provision allocation to the theft of Imperial resources. I said I would need access to depot schedules, security information, inventory projections. They provided it. I never asked how they obtained it. I did not want to know. I spent 1 week analyzing the data. The depot operated on a predictable schedule. Deliveries occurred every 4 days. Inventory peaked immediately post-delivery. Security consisted of 6 guards during day cycle, 4 during night cycle. The guards were not Arbites. They were hired security, underpaid, minimally trained. The depot's location in Sector Kappa 9 placed it far enough from major Arbite stations that response time would be approximately 12 to 15 minutes. I designed the operation. Optimal timing. Night cycle, 2nd day post-delivery when inventory remained high, but guard alertness had degraded. Team size, 20 individuals divided into acquisition crew and security crew. Duration, 8 minutes maximum. Acquire as much as transportable. Exfiltrate before response arrives. Distribution post-operation. Immediate dispersal to 3 separate warehouses, then redistribution to congregation members over the following week to minimize detection patterns. I presented the plan to the conductor. He reviewed it. He approved it. The raid occurred 6 days later. I did not participate directly. I remained at one of the warehouses, prepared to receive and process acquired materials. The team departed at the 14th hour of night cycle. They returned at approximately the 16th hour. 4 cargo haulers loaded with food, protein, carbohydrates, preserved vegetables, nutritional supplements, Medical supplies. Approximately 8 tons of material, total. One member of the acquisition team had been shot. Non-fatal. Treated with supplies from the raid. 2 guards at the depot had been killed. Unavoidable, the team leader said. They had resisted. I processed the acquired materials. I implemented the distribution plan. 8 tons of food fed the congregation for 3 months at increased allocation rates. We accepted 200 new members during that period. The congregation's reputation expanded exponentially. The Arbeits response was immediate and comprehensive. They identified the depot raid as organized cult activity. They increased patrols in the subsector. They arrested approximately 100 individuals on suspicion of cult involvement, most of them unconnected to us, simply convenient targets who happened to worship in unapproved ways. They executed 50 of those arrested publicly in the main transit plaza as warning. The conductor called an emergency gathering. He said, "The Imperium murders 50 innocent people and calls it justice. We feed 500 starving families and they call it heresy. This is the nature of their rule. This is why we serve different powers. Powers that value life, that provide for those in need, that do not demand endless sacrifice to a corpse sitting on a golden chair." The congregation responded with liturgy. The words had become automatic for me by then. I chanted with the others. I performed the gestures. I meant nothing by it. I had stopped meaning things months ago. But the system had achieved something I had not fully intended. The congregation was now large enough, organized enough, and supplied enough to sustain itself, to grow, to metastasize through the underhive. And I had designed the logistical framework that made that growth possible. I had saved my sons. In doing so, I had helped construct a machine that would damn thousands of others. The equation had expanded beyond my original calculation. Karas asked me around this time where all the food came from. He was 11, old enough to notice patterns, to observe that our hab unit received supplies with regularity that did not match my wages from the reclamation yards. I told him I had taken secondary employment, logistics work for a community organization. He asked what kind of organization. I said it helped families in need. He said, "Like us?" I said, "Yes, like us." He looked at me with an expression I will carry into whatever comes after death. Trust, complete, unquestioning. He said, "That's good work, Father. Better than the yards." I agreed that it was better than the yards. That conversation occurred approximately 6 weeks before the enforcers came. The raids began without warning. Not Arbeits this time. They had escalated to Militarum support. Actual Imperial Guard units deployed into the underhive to root out cult presence. Someone had informed, someone with detailed knowledge of our locations, our membership, our operations. The information was too accurate to be coincidence. They hit 3 warehouses simultaneously, killed approximately 80 congregation members in the initial assault, arrested another 60. The conductor and most of the devoted escaped. We had maintained emergency evacuation protocols precisely for this scenario. The congregation fractured into cells. We ceased large gatherings. We operated in small groups, constantly relocating. I moved my family, left our hab unit in Block Kappa 5, found temporary shelter in level -80, Section Gamma. The boys understood something had gone wrong, but did not understand what. I told them there had been trouble with the community organization, that we needed to stay hidden for a time. Karas said, "Are we in danger?" I said we would be fine if we remained careful. That was true from a certain perspective. The enforcers were hunting congregation leadership, not every family that had received provision. But if they identified me as logistical coordinator, as someone who had planned operations, I would be executed. And my sons would return to administratum rations if they were fortunate. More likely, they would be flagged as cult-adjacent and face punitive measures. I continued working with the surviving congregation leadership. We operated from a basement space in Sector Theta. Perhaps 15 people remained from the core organization. The conductor, Carrick, a handful of other devoted, myself. We attempted to maintain provision for remaining congregation members, but our supply lines had been destroyed. The black market contacts had either been arrested or had ceased cooperation. The depot raid had been a singular event. We could not repeat it. Security had been increased across all administrative facilities. The food ran out. I watched provision allocations decrease week by week, from adequate to minimal to insufficient. I watched families who had relied on congregation support for months face the reality that the support was ending. I watched the system I had built collapse because the foundation, stolen food and murder purchased favor from powers I did not fully understand, was not sustainable. Karis began losing weight again, slowly. 0.5 kilogram over 2 weeks, then a full kilogram. The deficit was returning. I had bought time, years of time. But time, like all resources, depletes. The conductor called a final gathering. All remaining core members. He said, "The Imperium has won this engagement. They have destroyed our infrastructure. But the powers we serve do not abandon the faithful. We can call upon them directly, petition for their intervention. The price will be significant. But the alternative is watching our families starve, while the Imperium congratulates itself on restoring order." I asked what price. He said, "One of us must offer themselves, fully. Not symbolic participation, not ritual blood. Complete consecration. Body and soul given to the powers in exchange for their direct action. They will provide, they will protect the congregation. But the offering must be absolute." Carrick said, "I will do it." The conductor said, "No, you are needed for security coordination. The offering must be someone whose function can be replaced." He looked at me. He said, "You have served with distinction. You have built the systems that sustained hundreds. But those systems no longer function. The congregation needs intervention you cannot provide through logistics." I understood what he was saying. I was being selected for sacrifice. For consecration, which was terminology that meant something between death and transformation into something no longer recognizably human. I thought of Karis, 40 kilograms now, declining. I thought of the expression on his face when he had said, "That's good work, Father." I thought of Pell and Jem, 7 and 9 years old, alive because I had damned myself incrementally over 2 years. I said I would need time to consider. The conductor said, "You have until tomorrow." I returned to the shelter where my sons slept. I watched them for a sustained period, 2 hours, 3. I calculated outcomes. If I refused, the congregation would collapse entirely. My sons would return to baseline starvation. The years I had purchased would terminate. If I accepted, the conductor claimed the powers would provide. I had no evidence to trust that claim. But I had no evidence to trust anything else either. Karis woke during my observation. He said, "Father, are you well?" I said I was thinking about work. He said, "The community organization?" I said yes. He said, "Will we have food tomorrow?" I said, "Yes, I will make certain of it." He returned to sleep. I continued watching. At approximately the 6th hour of morning cycle, I returned to the basement in Sector Theta. I informed the conductor I accepted. The ritual occurred that night, different from the monthly inner circle gatherings, more complex. The symbols painted on the floor were more intricate. The liturgy was longer. The conductor and the remaining devoted participated, but I was the focus. They cut patterns into my skin, not fatal cutting, symbolic. The same patterns I had seen on the conductor's torso. They chanted in that language I had never fully learned. They called upon powers I had never believed in. I knelt in the center of the symbols and waited for whatever would occur. I do not know how to describe what followed. My recollection of the event is corrupted. I can log fragments. Sensation of heat without fire. Perception of presence without visible entity. Sound without source. I can log that I screamed. I can log that the pain was comprehensive. I can log that something changed in my cognitive framework, something about the way I processed reality. When consciousness returned to functional state, The conductor said, "It is done. You are marked. The powers have accepted the offering. They will provide." I asked what had been done to me. He said, "You are theirs now. Body consecrated, soul bound. You will continue to function, but you are no longer entirely yourself. The powers will use you as they require. In exchange, your family will be protected, fed, sustained. This is the covenant." I did not feel different. That is important to log. I felt precisely as I had before, same thoughts, same memories, same capacity to analyze and decide. But the conductor's certainty suggested something had occurred beyond my perception. I returned to my sons the following day. They were awake, hungry. I gave them the rations I had remaining. Not enough, barely enough to quiet the immediate hunger. Then someone knocked on our shelter entrance. Not aggressive pounding, a light knock. I opened the door. A woman I did not recognize stood there. She held a package. She said, "For the family of Davrim Holst, with the congregation's regards." She departed before I could respond. I opened the package. Food, significant quantity. Enough for 2 weeks at adequate allocation. The packages continued arriving every 3 days. Different individuals delivering. Always adequate food. I do not know where the food originated. The congregation's supply lines had been destroyed. But the provision arrived consistently. Keris regained the lost weight, stabilized at 42 kilograms. Pel and Gem continued growing. The consecration, whatever had been done to me, appeared to have achieved its stated purpose. But I felt it growing inside me, not a physical sensation, cognitive, a presence, like something observing my thoughts, like something waiting. I would wake during sleep cycle with memories of dreams I could not fully recall, symbols, voices, instructions in that language I had never learned, but now somehow understood fragments of. I began having impulses I did not recognize as originating from my own decision matrix. Small things initially, specific routes to walk, specific people to speak with, specific words to say during those conversations. I would comply, then analyze why I had complied, and find no clear reasoning. The presence was not malevolent. That is important to log. It did not cause pain. It did not demand actions that harmed my sons. It simply guided, suggested, redirected my decisions toward outcomes I did not fully comprehend. 3 months after the consecration, Carrick found me. He said the conductor wanted to see me. I arrived at the current meeting location. We had relocated again, constantly mobile to avoid enforcer detection. The conductor said, "The powers speak through you now. We have observed it. Your presence brings fortune to operations. Individuals you interact with are more successful. The congregation members you contact experience improved outcomes. You have become a conduit." I asked what that meant practically. He said, "It means you serve more effectively now than when you planned logistics. The powers work through you to benefit the congregation. You are blessed." That was the terminology. I logged it as distinct from my subjective experience, which was more accurately described as compromised or occupied. But the outcomes were measurable. Congregation members I contacted did experience improved circumstances. Operations I was peripherally involved with succeeded more frequently. The statistical variance was significant enough to rule out coincidence. I had become a tool, not in the way I had been a tool when planning logistics. That was voluntary application of skill. This was something using me as medium, as channel, as instrument for outcomes I did not control. The enforcers intensified their operations. They were no longer conducting targeted raids. They were implementing systematic purges. Entire blocks cleared. Thousands arrested. Executions increased from dozens to hundreds to thousands per week. The congregation fractured further. The conductor declared we were entering a period of dormancy, that we would cease active operations, that members should disperse, blend into general population, wait for the purge to exhaust itself. I took my sons deeper into the underhive. Level -90. Conditions there were worse than -70. Less infrastructure, less administrative presence, more danger from ambient environmental factors. But also less enforcer activity. They did not patrol levels that deep unless absolutely necessary. We found a space, not a proper hab unit. A hollowed section of what had been a water treatment facility decades ago. We made it functional. I continued receiving provision packages. The deliveries always found me. No matter how many times we relocated, the packages arrived within 3 days. Karis was 12 by then. Pell was 10. Jem was 8. All 3 healthy. All 3 growing. All 3 alive because their father had participated in ritual murders, planned theft of Imperial resources, and offered himself to powers the Imperium rightly categorized as demonic. I began teaching Karis practical skills, how to evaluate structural integrity of abandoned spaces, how to identify clean water sources versus contaminated, how to avoid enforcer patrols, how to recognize dangerous individuals versus desperate but non-threatening. Survival information an underhive child needed. He learned quickly. He asked intelligent questions. He was developing into a functional young man. The kind who might survive to adulthood, who might eventually find employment, establish a family, perpetuate the cycle. I felt pride. I also felt horror that I felt pride, that I could observe my son's development and experience positive affect despite everything I had done to enable that development. The presence inside me had grown stronger. I no longer experienced it as foreign. It had integrated into my decision matrix sufficiently that I could not reliably distinguish between my choices and its influence. I would think thoughts and not know if they originated from me or from it. But it kept my sons fed, so I accepted it. The enforcers found the congregation's main leadership on a cold morning in the 3rd month of our dormancy. The conductor, Carrick, and 4 other devoted were meeting in what they believed was a secure location. Someone had informed. The enforcers arrived in force. 20 soldiers, military-grade weapons. They did not attempt arrest. They executed everyone in the room. I learned about it 3 days later when one of the surviving acolytes found me. He said, "The leadership is dead. The congregation is finished. You should disappear. Take your family. Go deeper. The enforcers are compiling lists. Anyone associated with the organization will be executed." I asked if they had my name. He said, "I do not know, but they have records, documents the conductor kept. If your name is in those documents, they will come." I thanked him. He departed. I never saw him again. I moved my sons again. Level -100, the bottom of the hive, where infrastructure had failed completely. No power, no water systems, no administrative presence whatsoever. Survival there meant scavenging, meant drinking water of questionable safety, meant breathing air that damaged lungs over time. But enforcers did not patrol there. No one did. The provision packages stopped arriving. For the first time in 18 months, no delivery. I waited 4 days. 5. Nothing. The conductor was dead. Whatever arrangement he had made with the powers, whatever mechanism had ensured food reached my family, had died with him. Karis noticed immediately. He said, "The deliveries have stopped." I confirmed. He said, "Why?" I said the community organization had been shut down by authorities. He said, "What do we do now?" I said I would find work, that we would manage. But there was no work at level -100, nothing to scavenge that held value. No one to trade with, no economy. We were below the functional threshold of the hive civilization. I watched my sons begin to decline again. Karis lost 2 kilograms in 3 weeks. Pell and Jem followed the same trajectory. The familiar hollowing returned, the specific look in their eyes. I had purchased years, 4 years of adequate nutrition, development, growth, life. And now those years were terminating. The deficit was returning. The mathematics were reasserting themselves. The presence inside me remained, but it no longer guided or suggested. It simply observed. I could feel it watching as my sons starved. It did not intervene. It had no purpose in intervention. It had gotten what it needed from me, whatever that was, and now it simply waited. I attempted to find food. I scavenged level -95, found scraps, brought them back. Not enough. I attempted to trade my labor. No one needed labor. Everyone at those levels was in the same condition. Desperate, starving, competing for resources that did not exist. I considered returning to higher levels, but higher levels meant enforcer presence. If my name was on their lists, I would be executed on sight. My sons would be taken, interrogated, possibly killed, possibly placed in Schola Progenium as orphans of heretics. Either outcome was unacceptable. Karras stopped asking about food after the second week. He understood. He was 12, old enough to recognize when hope is no longer operative. He said to me one night, "Father, will we die here?" I wanted to lie to him. I wanted to provide reassurance. But I had spent 4 years lying. The capacity for it had exhausted. I said, "Possibly. I am trying to prevent that. But it is possible." He nodded. He said, "Thank you for trying." That broke something in me. Not dramatically. Not with emotional catharsis, just a quiet recognition that I had failed. That everything I had done, every murder participated in, every resource stolen, every boundary crossed, had purchased only time, and time runs out. The enforcers found us 6 days later. I do not know how they tracked us to level -100. Perhaps they had surveillance systems I was unaware of. Perhaps someone had informed about our location. Perhaps the presence inside me had signaled them somehow, a final function of my consecration I had not understood. They arrived in the morning. 12 soldiers, armor, weapons. They surrounded our shelter. An officer called out, "Davrim Holst, you are identified as cult leadership. Exit the structure. You will be executed. Your children will be remanded to administratum custody." I told my sons to stay inside, to remain quiet, to not draw attention. Karras said, "Father, what's happening?" I said, "I need to resolve something. Stay here. Do not come out." He tried to follow me. I pushed him back inside. I sealed the entrance as well as I could with debris. I exited the shelter. The officer said, "Davrim Holst, you are charged with heresy, theft of Imperial resources, participation in ritual murder, and corruption by chaos entities. These charges carry mandatory death sentence. Do you contest?" I said I did not contest. He said, "Do you wish to make statement for the record?" I said, "My sons are not part of this. They received food. They did not know where it came from. They are innocent." He said, "They are contaminated by association with cult member. They will be processed according to protocol." I asked what processing meant. He said, "Interrogation, psychological evaluation, possible remediation or termination depending on assessment results." I understood. They would torture my sons to extract information. Then they would kill them or conscript them into some penal institution. Either way, Karras, Pell, and Jem would not survive as themselves. I had one option remaining. The presence inside me had been passive for weeks, but I called to it now. I did not know how to call. I simply directed my cognition toward it and requested intervention. It responded. I do not know how to describe the sensation. Power, but not physical power. Reality altering around me. The officer's face changed expression from professional detachment to horror. He raised his weapon. I moved faster than I should have been able to move. I took his weapon. I fired. His head detonated. I continued firing. 3 more soldiers down before they responded. Last rounds hit me, shoulder, leg, abdomen. Pain was enormous but distant. The presence was managing my body now, using it as it had always intended to use it. I killed 4 more soldiers before they concentrated fire sufficiently to drop me. I fell. Could not rise. The remaining soldiers approached cautiously. One of them said he was possessed. The reports were accurate. He had been fully consecrated. Another said, "Purge the shelter. Standard protocols. No survivors." I tried to shout, tried to warn my sons to run. My voice did not function. Last round had damaged my throat. They approached the shelter entrance. I heard Keras scream. I heard weapons fire. I heard the specific sound of a child's body falling. 3 shots, 3 sons. The presence inside me withdrew. Suddenly, completely. Like it had never been there. I was alone in my own mind for the first time in 18 months. The soldiers dragged me away from the shelter, left me propped against a wall. The officer, a different one, the first was very dead, said, "You will bleed out in approximately 30 minutes. We will wait. After you are dead, we will burn the bodies. This location will be marked as purged." That concludes enforcement action. They withdrew 10 meters, stood guard, waited for me to die. I am dying now. The wound in my abdomen is catastrophic. I can feel blood pooling internally, pressure building, organs shutting down in sequence. Keras is dead, Pell is dead, Gem is dead. I can see their bodies from here. The soldiers dragged them out of the shelter after, lined them up. Official documentation requires visual confirmation. Keras is 40 kilograms. Pell is 36. Gem is 31. I kept them alive 4 years. 4 years of growth and development and life they would not have had if I had remained obedient to the Imperium's systems. 4 years purchased with 12 murders, possibly more. I lost count. 4 years purchased with my damnation, with my consecration to powers that used me and discarded me when convenient. 4 years that terminated with their execution, with my execution, with the complete erasure of the Holst family line. The mathematics of it are clean. I traded everything for 4 years. The trade was not worthwhile, but it was the only trade available. I need to be clear about this before cognitive function fails. I do not regret the choice. I regret that the choice was necessary. I regret that the Imperium creates conditions where a father must choose between watching his children starve and damning himself to feed them. I regret that there was no third option, but I do not regret choosing damnation. The Imperium will log this as successful purge operation. Cult leadership eliminated. Chaos corruption cleansed. Heretical family line terminated. They will congratulate themselves. They will file reports. They will allocate resources to the next purge operation. They will never acknowledge that they created me, that their system of controlled starvation, of insufficient rations, of bureaucratic indifference to suffering, was the mechanism that pushed me toward the congregation. That every father in the Underhive faces the same calculation I faced, that thousands of us exist at any given moment, weighing loyalty to the Imperium against the lives of our children. The Imperium functions by creating this condition, by ensuring that loyalty is tested through suffering, that faith is demonstrated through accepting inadequate provision, that the righteous starve while maintaining prayer to the God Emperor. I failed the test. I chose my sons over the Imperium. The Imperium has now corrected my failure by executing my sons. The system functions perfectly. It creates heretics. It purges heretics. It sustains itself through this cycle. I was fuel. My sons were fuel. The soldiers who killed us are fuel. The entire Underhive is fuel burning to maintain a civilization that requires endless combustion. The presence is gone. Whatever I was consecrated to has departed, but I can still feel the marks on my skin. The patterns they cut into me. They burn, not painful burning, just heat. Like I am generating temperature I should not be able to generate while bleeding out. Perhaps I will not die. Perhaps I will transform into something else, something the powers use more directly. I do not know. I have perhaps 15 minutes of consciousness remaining to find out. Keras's eyes are open. I can see them from here. He is staring at nothing. He was 12 years old. He would have been a good man, competent, intelligent, capable of surviving in conditions that kill most people. He will never be anything now. Pell is 9. Gem is 8. Same situation. Potential terminated, bodies to be burned and forgotten. The officers are talking among themselves. One of them is filling out documentation on a data slate, logging casualty numbers. Cult affiliation confirmed. Chaos corruption assessed. Purge successful. I am becoming a statistic. My sons are becoming statistics. This entire event will reduce to a line in a report. Level -100. Section Gamma, cult cell eliminated. 4 hostiles terminated. No Imperial casualties. Accurate. I can feel my heart rate declining. Blood pressure dropping. Vision narrowing. The specific symptoms of hypovolemic shock progressing toward terminal state. I have approximately 10 minutes. I want to move toward my sons. I want to close Karis's eyes, but I cannot move. The leg wounds have destroyed too much muscle. I am fixed in position against this wall until I stop breathing. The cold is significant now. Not environmental cold, internal cold. My body shutting down peripheral systems to preserve core function. It will not succeed. Core damage is too severe. 5 minutes, perhaps. I thought I would have more to say, more to testify. But it reduces to this. I was a father. My children were starving. I found a way to feed them. The way required damnation. I chose damnation. They ate, they grew, they lived 4 additional years. Then the Imperium killed them and killed me. That is the testimony. That is the data. That is what occurred. The Imperium will call this justice, will call me heretic, will call my sons contaminated, will call the congregation evil. They are correct. The congregation was evil. The practices were heretical. I participated in genuine evil to achieve good outcome for 3 specific individuals. The equation does not balance morally, but it was the only equation available. If I had remained loyal to the Imperium, my sons would have died 4 years ago. Starved, age 8, 6, and 3. The Imperium would not have noticed, would not have cared, would have filed their deaths as acceptable population reduction. I gave them 4 years. 4 years the Imperium denied them. 4 years of life and growth and existence. The cost was my soul, was 12 other souls, was the damnation I knowingly accepted. I would make the same choice again. That is important to log. Given identical conditions, I would choose damnation again, because the alternative was watching Karis die at age 8, was watching Pell die at age 6, was watching Jem die at age 3. No father should face that choice. But the Imperium ensures millions of fathers face that choice daily. Ensures that we calculate the mathematics of loyalty versus love. Ensures that some of us choose love and become heretics. Then they execute us for choosing love, and they call it justice. My vision is degrading. I can see shapes but not details. Karis's body is a dark mass approximately 4 meters away. Pell and Jem are next to him. The soldiers are moving, preparing to fire the shelter. Standard purge protocols. They will burn my sons, burn the shelter, burn any evidence that the host family existed. In 3 months, new people will occupy this space. They will not know what happened here. They will not know that a father died 4 meters from that wall, that 3 children died because their father tried to save them. The space will not remember. The Imperium will not remember. No one will remember. This testimony is all that remains. These words, this data, this log of what occurred. I am Davrim Holst. I was a father. I damned myself to save my sons. The Imperium killed us all. That is the truth. That is what happened. I can no longer see. Auditory function degrading. I can hear voices but cannot distinguish words. Cardiac rhythm irregular. Breathing shallow. Peripheral sensation absent. This is death. I am experiencing death. I thought there would be more to it. Just cold. Just darkness. Just cessation. The presence has not returned. Whatever I was consecrated to has abandoned me. I will die as myself. As Davrim. Not as whatever I was becoming. That is something. Small, but something. Karis, Pell, Jem. I tried. I failed. I am